The Northern Irish border is a major Brexit headache. It will be the UK's only land border with the European Union when, or if, Brexit becomes a reality next March. Political leaders are still trying to come up with a solution that everyone agrees with. But what impact could the outcome have on border communities, many of whom still remember the reality of a hard, militarised border? We went on a road trip from one end of the border to the other, speaking to the people whose lives will be affected. Our first stop was a small village with a bit of an unusual name, Muff, in County Donegal.
So we're about to cross the border from County Derry into County Donegal, and we're going to be talking to a business they're actually located right inside the border, just inside Donegal.
Yeah, we're going to talk to the Boghopper Brewery, and we're going to ask them about what they're worried about Brexit-wise and what they're doing to prepare for it. A small stream a few metres behind the brewery marks the border.
This is Boghopper Brewery here in Muff in County Donegal, and I own and run this business along with my husband David. We opened in late 2015 and we've just been building slowly. I'd say initially my main concern would be tariffs. If there's no trade agreement in place, I've heard some suggestions that tariffs to the World Trade Organization rules would be up to 50%. So some of our ingredients and raw materials like bottles could rise by 50% in cost. There's very, very tight margins in a brewery. It's not a get-rich-quick scheme, so every cent counts. So if you start adding like 50% cost onto your basic packaging, it's going to be huge for us. It's difficult enough to try and make a living. The quickest way for us to get to Dublin is to go from Derry through Northern Ireland and down to Dublin. If there was a hard border in place, if they start limiting the number of access points to Northern Ireland, slowing that down, or don't let us even drive through Northern Ireland with beer because it's an excisable product, we might actually be forced to go all the way around by Sligo to get to Dublin, which again would be a massive impact on us because whatever small margin we make on the beer would be very quickly lost if we have to start driving around the country to deliver it. So a lot of people here work in Northern Ireland. It may limit their access to work, limit their access to education because a lot of them will go to college in the north. And it's also limiting people to come and visit us. So we're going to be kind of strangled because we're going to be this little outcast county on the edge of the country. And I don't know, I worry that, the government is going to throw Donegal under the bus, without worrying about the real implications.
We drove back across the border and to the banks of Lough Foyle.
So at the moment we're parked at Lough Foyle, which is located between County Derry and County Donegal. And Lough Foyle is interesting because it's a disputed territory between the UK government and the Irish government. And that has been going on for decades, but it hasn't been a problem up until now because they had the same regulations under the European Union. The same fishing regulations applied no matter what country it was. But the problem now is that with Brexit, when the UK leaves the European Union, there will be different fishing regulations, probably. And the question that poses is, how are they going to implement two different fishing regulations in the one area?
There's also another disputed territory, and that's Carlingford Lough, which is on the other side of the border, and that's between County Down and County Louth. That faces the same problem, and we're actually going to be visiting there later on in our trip.
Next stop is Pettigo, a small village which has featured in several international news reports on Brexit due to its unusual situation. It's split between County Fermanagh and County Donegal by this bridge. We spoke to some of the locals there. First up, the postmaster.
We're a bit fortunate in that there never was a permanent army checkpoint at this village. It's one of the very few border crossings, but you could go 3 or 4 miles down the road back into the north, and there was a permanent British Army checkpoint down there. It was reasonably normal in that way. I suppose the biggest difference was, apart from the troubles end of it, was the regulations with customs and stuff. Stops at checkpoints with customs and that. It made it feel more like a border with customs. Once that changed I think it was in the late 1990s. When the customs border went, everything became very free after that. We used to get people in from the north for cheaper postage and that, but it's evened up a good bit in the last 12 months or so. But especially this year, we've had a huge run in northern people, probably from both traditions, coming in for getting passports, especially for the first time.
Irish passports?
Irish passports, okay. Because once you're born in Ireland, on the island of Ireland, you're entitled to an Irish passport.
Just outside the town, we met with Martin Eaves, who runs a wood chip manufacturer and is also the chair of a cross-border regeneration project in the village.
We want to live in a community that is a radius of 360 degrees, not 180 degrees. I mean, that's what we're looking at, just from a social side. And years ago, when the Troubles were in place, you know, it was helicopters at night flying up and down the river with their searchlights on. I remember as kids looking out the top window and would be, you know, in full view, and they'd spot you and you'd be in the full spotlight for 10 or 20 seconds. Leo Varadkar, I doubt, will come here, and Theresa May didn't come here. But at least you did come here, so maybe that's how we will get our message across, that this isn't acceptable. And if it goes, and surely Varadkar don't have the final say either, but if it goes against us, then there is going to be some serious assistance needed along the border to protect our communities and keep them together. Because if there's going to be a border, there's going to be a vacuum, there's going to be all kinds of illegal businesses going on, and when you have that, eventually will lead to trouble, and we fear that so much.
We paid a brief visit to Beleak, a town in the headlines recently. It was one of the few spots Theresa May visited during her first trip to the border as UK Prime Minister. Here she is in a pottery workshop with the leader of the Democratic Unionist Party, Arlene Foster. We headed further into Northern Ireland to Enniskillen and spoke with Father Joe McVeigh, who fears the impact a hard border could have on the peace process.
And the fear is now that if there's a hard Brexit, a hard border, and customs and excise posts are put up, that will provoke a reaction from maybe some group like the IRA, that there will be an tax on these border checkpoints as symbols again of this division in Ireland. That will in turn probably require protection from British Army and police, and the British would be only too willing to send over their army to give them something to do, which in turn will escalate, as it did before, into an all-out conflict, violence, and I've seen it happening in the past, and I fear that it will happen again. We're in a very difficult situation here, politically, but I'm hoping that in the course of the next 6 months or year, there will be many more developments. I'm kind of hopeful, while I'm anxious, I'm still hopeful that in the end it will be resolved, because if they realise the alternative or the consequences of going backwards instead of forwards, it's too horrific to contemplate.
We drove on to Clones, a section of the border which demonstrates just how much the roads weave in and out of the two jurisdictions. A detour along these narrow country roads shows just how frequently you cross between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland in a short space of time.
Okay, we need to stop here for 1 second and discuss how complicated the next about 1.5 kilometres of road is.
Google Maps shows the border running along the middle of it. Northern Ireland is in the left-hand lane and the Republic is in the right. But when you check official maps, the story is a little different.
So a report published this year outlined the 208 border crossings which exist officially between the Republic and Northern Ireland. Along this road is one little point where the border suddenly juts across. That's the official border crossing.
those little bits on Google Maps don't really count.
The authority for where the border lies is a map that was created in the early 20th century. But even when you look at this map, it's still not crystal clear where exactly the border lies on this particular stretch of road.
So this short stretch up until that official border crossing, it demonstrates how hard it could be in certain areas to implement either a hard border or even some minor level of border infrastructure.
Next stop on our trip was Combylift, on the outskirts of Monaghan town. It's a major employer in the area and a large number of workers travel across the border to work here each day. For them, Brexit poses its own set of problems.
Just even for myself, finance, what happens with mortgages and what happens because all my finances in the south, even for cross-border trading, so the exchange rate, how that's even going to go, is it going to go worse? Nobody knows what way that's going to happen, every day-to-day living, your fuel prices, even right down to your cars, everything else, Yeah, I'm working here, all my life in the south, so all my taxes have been paid in the south, throughout my life. So the biggest question I'd be thinking to myself is whenever I come from retirement age to move back to, to settle in Northern Ireland, how will it affect my pensions? Because the relationship between the Irish government and the UK could be gone at that stage, so that actually my pension could be dead, or maybe have to move to the south for pensions. There's a lot of uncertainty even with myself in that, where that'll be for state pension as such, because I've never worked in the UK. So when I move back across, I have to move back across, could be a big factor whenever I go to retire. So yeah, well, when I was younger, starting to work, I used to have to travel back across the border here to Monaghan again. And back then with your checkpoints, okay, they were a little bit different. You still had, you had the army checkpoints, which would be different, but you still had that time gap, so you never really knew. Some days it was clear, some days it weren't, so it was not only on the way to work, it was on the way home from work. So you could say normally, again, 40 to 50 minutes, so there's nothing there, which could stretch out to over an hour. So, if that goes back to that, that'll have a massive, effect on the border counties, not just Monaghan, but the whole area.
The uncertainty around tariffs and the movement of goods is also a concern, especially for a big business like Combylift.
If you take the whole supply chain, like you look at us as a manufacturing plant, not only are we sourcing raw material in the UK, we're sourcing raw material in France, Germany, other markets. And when these products are being transited to here, we could have a transport company that might collect 2 pallets in Germany, 1 pallet of goods in France, maybe 5 pallets in the UK. So you can imagine when that comes to a border crossing, that it's not going to be frictionless. When you have multiple goods on the same vehicle, we all think of a closed container that's sealed. So they're saying that the border could be frictionless, so there's no delay at customs. But when you have products that you have multiple countries of origin on the same transit vehicle, that's going to cause delays. And of course, delays cost money. So it's going to mean that our raw goods are going to go up in price, and it's going to cost more for the consumer long term.
A short distance away in Derrynews is a farm belonging to Brian Renahan. Brexit holds uncertainty for all farmers, but for Brian, his land is split by the border, and he's unsure of what the future holds for it. We sheltered from the rain in his pub in Clontibret.
Well, our family farm has been in the family for, I suppose, 5-6 generations. It's a long time there in where it is. And the border runs through the middle of the land, and the border is a stream. About a quarter of the farm would be in the Republic of Ireland, the rest of it would be in Northern Ireland. As regards cattle, that you would keep the cattle on the northern side and things like that there, and the brother who had southern cattle would keep them on the southern side. But if you were making fodder, you just walked through one another, and you could take from the south into it just worked as a unit, as a farm. The same rules applied in Northern Ireland as applied in the south of Ireland as regards single farm payments, things like that there. So there's never been an issue with the border at our farm as such, especially these last few years from the Good Friday Agreement came. Everybody works to have the income to rear their family and keep their house and all the rest. So the big part of your income from farming in north or south is your single farm payment. And the single farm payment is what really keeps, I'd say, 95% of the farmers in farming. And the single farm payment is there to provide people with cheap food. Now, if the single farm payment goes in Northern Ireland, we cannot produce the food at the same price. The price of your meat and vegetables has to increase. Now, that's not going to happen for the simple reason that the supermarket dictates the price of everything. And the supermarket are going to say, right guys, if you're going to charge us more for the meat, we're going to get it elsewhere. And the place they're going to go is South America and other countries where they can buy it for half the price. And for politicians to say that, you know, we'll still get markets for your meat and you still get good price and maybe an increase in price, that's carology. That is not going to happen. Like, I think it's only now that people are starting to realise what could happen. It's the hard, because up to now, I think people didn't people always thought it'll be sorted, common sense will come and it'll be sorted. But now, the way people are digging in their heels, it seems that it may not be sorted, and if it's not sorted, God help everybody along the border, like, you know.
The seaside town of Warrenpoint was almost the final stop on our Brexit road trip. Having suffered an economic downturn during the Troubles, the future for its main business, fishing and shipping, is now uncertain.
Well, Warrenpoint's a seaside resort. We used to have about 7 hotels between Warrenpoint and Rostrevor during the boom times, and each and every one of them have gone because of the Troubles. And we have a very busy and growing port, and is the second biggest port in the north of Ireland. The police station in Warrenpoint closed some years back, 2.5 years ago, and it was promised to the council to get a community centre out of at the last moment. Only a number of weeks ago, that was pulled from under our feet when the police said that it's now not available to the council because it may be needed for a customs post after Brexit.
Warrenpoint looks out over Carlingford Lough, which, like Lough Foyle, is a disputed territory. We spoke to a local oyster farmer about how Brexit will affect his own business, but also about how a border could impact all those who work on this loch.
The product that we sell is a living creature, it's an oyster. If it gets held up and it misses a boat, well, it can die, and who's going to pay for shells? We can't get held up at the customs, we can't get held up at harbours. It has to be straight through, and that's it. There's great traceability in it, where you're fit to trace it back to the farm. The date is great, it's fantastic. It's all very well integrated all over Europe. Like, my understanding of it was there was never really an official border drew up the loch. It was still all up for dispute, really. Like, you know, it's one side claims the high water mark on this side, and the other side claims the high water mark on the other side. We don't know actually where the border is. We know there's a gentleman's agreement up the middle of the loch, but whether that stands up to any sort of scrutiny, I don't know.
And do UK registered boats stay on one side and the Irish on the other?
Sure, there's no border on it, so there's boys fishing lobsters and they're at the mouth of the loch and they're going right over to that side, and same with the guys from this side's coming right over to this side. Because there is no border, then they can't stop them.
So will that change with Brexit?
I don't see how it can. Possibly there was a few silly rules from Europe, maybe not, I don't know. But Europe buys most of the fish. that's my point. Like, they're buying all the fish, so well, what are you going to sell it to?
And that's our trip almost over. On the way back, we drove down the Dublin Road, close to the N1, where old customs and border infrastructure are still visible. We're going to give the last word to an expert in Irish border security, who told us what day-to-day life was like back at the height of the border and gave his prediction for the months ahead.
It was, I suppose, at its most basic, a delay, and for some people it was a very traumatic experience. Some people got a lot of hassle. We had people shot dead at checkpoints. You know, you had Aidan McInnesby shot dead at Achmacloy vehicle checkpoint. You had another man shot dead in Middletown vehicle checkpoint. You know, it was, and again, there was ongoing harassment for individuals throughout the course of the Troubles. You had main border crossings. You had Achmacloy, Middletown, and between Dundalk and Newry. They were the three main border crossings. Now, it depended what time of day you went through there. It depended on if there'd been incidents locally. It depended on a range of factors. It depended maybe on what the British Army thought of you, what the RUC more likely thought of you as an individual, or did they know anything about you. When you got to the checkpoint, you had to stop. You may have had a delay of 15 minutes before you went through. You know, maybe people who had come across the British Army in different circumstances, or the RUC in different circumstances, maybe there's some sort of prejudice against them. They might have been brought in, they might have been interrogated, they might have been questioned for a while, they might have been delayed. So at these border crossings, it was a traumatic experience for some people. A lot of the time people were just waved through. A lot of the time there was unnecessary delays. I think Pascal Lamy from the World Trade Organization, it's an organisation we probably don't hear that much about because we're in a free trade area and we do a lot of our trade within that, but there's probably nobody more experienced than Pascal Lamy from the World Trade Organization about borders and border infrastructure. He said, we're going to have to get used to the idea that there probably will be some border infrastructure on the island. Now, I don't think even the British government know what they want themselves. So the prospects of some super deal, better than Switzerland got, better than Norway got, better than Turkey got, all of those deals taking years and years to negotiate, been agreed within the next 6 months, seems to me extremely unlikely. So I think we are set for some sort of border infrastructure. We are set for some sort of disruption, I suppose, to daily life in some way, whether this mythical magic technology that the Tory party and the UK are aware of, that nobody else in the world is aware of, can solve the problem. I don't know, but it doesn't seem very likely to me. Now that will, I suppose, mean disruption to daily, people's daily lives. It won't mean an immediate resumption of violence, but medium to long term, it's certainly not going to be good for people living along the border, and it's not going to be good for the peace process in the long term.